Welcome back. In this video, what we're going to spend all our time talking about is variables. And to understand really deep down what a variable is about, you have to realize that a variable has a name. It's how do we identify the variable itself. It has another thing, this value. Okay, so we have a name and a value. And the next thing it actually has is a data type. Is it an integer? Is it a string? Is it a Boolean? This is what we refer to as its data type. And then the last thing it actually has is in memory somewhere, it has an address. So somewhere hidden in your hard drive or your memory stick or your thumb drive, it actually has a hexadecimal address in memory so that it can be recalled by your software application. But luckily for us in Python, the only two things that really matter for us as developers is the name and the value. Okay. And so if we look at this from a practical example, we can say that a name tag is a variable. If I wanted to identify myself as a variable, I would give it the name, hello, my name is, and the value would be Tom. Okay, and I suppose you could say that my address would be my home address right now if you wanted to locate me. And the data type that I would be using here in this particular case would be a string. Okay, so the word Tom would be considered a string. So in a nutshell, this is really what it breaks down to. And the beautiful thing about Python is that it eliminates dealing with the address and the data type, and we can just get to that written language style that Python is so popular for. We just have to put in the variable name and the value that we want to associate with the name. And that name itself is going to be tied to the storage location in memory of where that variable data actually is. So let's get back into Visual Studio Code and look at a practical example. So back in Visual Studio, if I say my underscore name underscore is, and I'm going to set it to Tom. And like before, because it's a string, I'm going to use double quotations. So I'm going to say Tom. So this is how in memory I can identify what the value is. And the value is going to be associated to Tom. I want you to understand something very clearly. This equal sign, it doesn't mean necessarily that my name is actually equals to Tom. I know that's what it looks like. But if I wanted to say that the two were identical, I would actually have to do it this way. I'd have to have two equal signs, but that's not really what I'm saying. And there's a difference between the left side of an equal sign and a right side of an equal sign. What it really means in programming, in almost any language that I can think of, is that everything on the right side of the equal sign is assigned to the actual name of the variable. Okay, so I know that seems like a little bit confusing. You know, how can you say that it doesn't equal, but it actually does equal? Well, you're going to see that further when we get into doing conditional operators. But right now, what's important to understand is the equal sign actually means that this is the assignment operator. It is saying assign the value of Tom to the name of the variable my name is. Okay, so if I go ahead and I Control S and I save that, and now let's go and do our print. And as you remember, it's a function. So I'm going to say you can see it pop up there with the IntelliSense, my name is, and then let's go over here and run it. And you can see down here where it actually outputs the value. Okay, so what I did is I identified the variable by its name, but it actually printed out the value. And that is because I assigned the value to my name is. Don't worry, we're going to be using variables every time we do programming, and we're going to get into much more detail about this throughout this particular video. Let's look at another example. Let's say age. I want to say what age is. And again, I'm going to assign an age. So let's go with 10. Okay. What you're not seeing here is that this is a variable type called an integer. And you can see when I highlight the number 10, it actually tells me what my data type is. And if you remember, I said, you know, one of the things that it has is an actual data type, but Python really takes care of that for us. We don't have to worry about putting in the data type. Okay. If we look at Tom again and we highlight Tom, okay, we just know that that is a string. And the reason we know it's a string is because it has quotations. But here, when we do this, we know that it actually is an integer. One, because it tells us, but two, because there's no decimal. So let's say I want to be 10.5. I want to be 10 and a half years old again. Okay, this is a different data type. You can see this is a floating data type. Okay, so there are different data types, and Python does deal with various data types. But the great thing is, we don't have to necessarily deal with the type until we explicitly tell it to. And there's a couple special ways that we might do that, and we'll get into those a little bit later. Let's spend just a little bit more time talking about some theoretical stuff of variables. And when we look at our data types, and I know that I said that Python actually does take care of the type, and it does, but you still need to be aware of what they are. And for the most part, we typically use these primitive types. And the primitive types actually break into 3 different categories, and a couple of them have little minor divisions there as well. So if we look at the very first one, let's say numbers. Okay, and numbers are broken down into things like an integer, and I showed you the example with the age of 10, or 10.5, which would be a float. And there are other data types associated with numbers. But for the most part, we don't have to get too involved in that, but you have to be aware of what they actually are. And we have another primitive data type called a Boolean, and this breaks down to a true or a false. And please note that when typing a Boolean, the syntax for this is a capital T. It is very case sensitive, or a capital F. So true or false. And then lastly, in our primitive types, we have strings. And the way we identify those strings is really through a set of quotes. It could be double quotes or single quotes. So let's go back into Visual Studio and again, look at a couple of different examples a little bit further. So we've got these other 2 examples. My name is Tom, age is 10. Let's look at another one. Let's say interest. Okay, interest is going to equal 1.55% as an example. We can now look at let's say as an example of a Boolean. And we'll do is underscore morning, because where I am, it's the morning. And I'm going to set that to true. And you can see that the IntelliSense actually picks it up. And I set that to true. And remember what I said, this is case sensitive, so it's got to be true with a capital T at the beginning, or it could be false. And you can see here, it does. But in my case, it is actually true. It is the morning where I am. And one note with Booleans is sometimes it's kind of a question. It's a true or a false question. So sometimes you might see this little prefix word of is underscore whatever it is you're trying to determine true or false to. We will talk some about naming conventions and formatting and stuff like that, especially of strings coming up shortly, but I just want you to be aware of that. There are little nuances. Okay, and let's do a string, video underscore name. And we're going to say double quotes Python. Okay, so by now you're pretty familiar with how strings work. Okay, and now, you know, I don't have to do a print statement. You've seen all this before, But basically, if I do want to refer to it, I just need to call the print function and add in its actual variable name to get the result that I want. But the one I haven't really demonstrated, and I'm going to show you what the output is, and it's going to be a Boolean. I want to show you what a Boolean looks like when you print it out to your screen. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to you. I'm not trying to trick you. The output should actually say that it's true. So if I go ahead and I run this for is morning, you can see down here that the output actually is equal to true. Okay, so all of these things, when I call the print function and I want to display what their value is to my console or to my screen, that's what it's going to always result in, okay? Before we go any further, there's something that is vitally important that you have to understand about variables. I see many even intermediate programmers that don't quite get this thing, but I'm going to tell you right now what it is. And here's the big secret. Variables are nouns. Okay, and you have to hold on to this idea in your head because in the future it's going to become very, very important to you. So always understand that variables are nouns. And if you don't remember from grammar what a noun is a person, place, or a thing. Okay, there's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, variables are nouns. This is going to become very, very important to you when we start to look at functions, or methods is another name of a function. But just hold on to that idea and understand that a variable is a noun, a person, place, or a thing. So let's go back into this original example here, and I'm gonna sort of reformat some of these. So one of my options is I can change this to a lowercase, okay? And please understand that this here is also a noun. Okay, we're really talking about my name is. In fact, I could change that, which would be a little bit preferable. So I would change this to noun. Okay, and I have the option to make that an uppercase if I want to. But typically, in my particular case, I would feel more comfortable making this more readable, just leaving it lowercase. Okay, so just name. And of course, this is a noun. And you can see here, when I highlight it, it shows that its data type is a string. Okay, and if I go to age, age is also a noun. Okay, and then interest. You can see that interest is a noun. This happens to be a float. And again, we've got this string. Okay, so if I want to take this out of here, I've got three examples of these primitive types that we talked about. I've got a string, I've got a number. I just took out the Boolean because right now I want to focus on really formatting or naming conventions. Now, if I want to combine two words, there's something I could do. I could do something called a camel case. I can do this where the second word or the subsequent words are capitalized, or I can keep it lowercase and put this underscore underneath it. Okay, so that's kind of an important thing. The idea is you want it to be easily identifiable and you want it to be easily readable. Okay, so those are important things to have. And of course, we already talked about in a previous video the spacing between these, and now we've configured this so that when I do save it, so if I make my formatting really ugly and then I go ahead and I save it, it automatically saves it for me. This should be readable, like reading a paragraph in a book is really what you want it to be. I also want this to be very self-explanatory. Okay, you know, I've got interest rate. As soon as you look at that, you understand what it is. I've got age and name. It's very, very self-explanatory when I do this. Now, over time, you'll come up sort of with your own style convention, or you may go to work somewhere and they may dictate to you what they want their naming conventions to be. And when they're talking about that, they're talking about how they want their variables and their methods or functions formatted, how they want it to look. Okay, so that's something to be aware of, that you'll start to develop your own style, but when you start to work for someone, they might actually dictate to you how they want it to look. The thing to take away from this is that my variables are nouns, and that my code, when I write it, is very clean and readable. Now, the last thing I want to say about your naming conventions is that they are singular. Okay, it's not names with an S or age with an S or interest rates with an S. They are all singular, okay, because they are nouns. They're individual nouns. Okay, so that's important to understand. Not only that they're nouns, but they're also singular. And they're very descriptive on how you write them so that you easily understand what it is when you're looking at that variable. Let's spend some time now talking about strings specifically. And I'm going to call it, say, video, and I'm going to call this one Python mini course. And as I've said many times, you can go with double quotes or single quotes, but typically you should be looking to default to double quotes. And there are instances where we're going to use single quotes, but typically you are going to want to stick with double quotes. So let's look at another example where you have a lot of text. So if I want to do email underscore message, okay, and what I want to do is actually set this to triple quotes. I want to say 1, 2, okay, so I've got 3 quotes, and then give it some space and then do that again. And you just hit your keyboard actually 3 times, it'll do that. So now I want to give myself some space, and I'm going to just say email blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't know what else to say. So this is an example where if I have a lot of text that I want to write, I can just keep writing my text in this way. Okay, so that's what I can do. That's one way to do a lot of text in one sort of a message. So let's get rid of this because it's just going to be in my way. So as you know, we can call this print function. This print in, we've done this many times already. And if I want to actually display the output, what I want to do is type in video. And when I put this video inside the print function, I need you to understand that that's actually called a parameter or an argument that I'm putting inside the brackets of this function. But don't worry about not understanding functions too much. We're going to do a whole entire video just dedicated to functions. But for now, we can't really do much without using them at this moment now, just to sort of show their usefulness and to try to understand how variables work. But what's important to understand is that I'm putting these variables as arguments inside this particular function. I don't always have to do that, but like I said, we'll get to functions later on in a future video. But for now, if I just want to see this, what I can do is run this, and you can see that it outputs Python mini course. But let's say I want to know the length of that string, like how many characters are in that actual string. So what we can do is we can call this function called the Len function, or length. So it's this function here. And what I can do is, just like I did with print, I can pass video as a parameter to that. So if I type in this video, this function, it's a library function built into Python. What I can do is actually call it. It's referred to. When you use a function, it's actually being referred to as calling the function. So what I can do is pass that parameter into the function. Now, if I want to know what the output of this is, and here's the really interesting thing, I can now actually put this function in its entirety inside another function. So now if I want to know what the length is, I can say print and put this inside the print function itself. Now when I run this, you can see that the number of characters in the length function, or len function, is 18. And that means every one of these characters is 18 characters long. Okay, so really important. And I can't actually run this, I can't do anything with it right now in this particular way. I can't really run that. It's got nothing to run. The only way to put it out to my terminal is if I actually call the print function. So let's keep going. The next thing I want to do is show you how to get access to, say, one individual character in the Python mini course string. Okay, and this kind of refers to something called an array element, but we're not going to talk about that now. We're actually going to come back in the future and do a whole section on data structures. But for now, the one thing that we can do is if I want to refer to that very first element, I want to refer to the P in Python mini course. What I can do is I can say video, and I'm going to call the very first element. And the way I do this is I use my square brackets and I type in 0. And what this means is that this position here for P is actually position 0. This is 1, sorry. This here, Y would be position 1, the T would be position 2, and so on and so forth. And they're referred to, each position is actually referred to as an element. Okay, so if I want to see what that looks like now, one thing I can do is put this back in the print function. And now I can go ahead and run this, and you can see that it outputs P. So let's just randomly take any number and say 10. What happens inside 10? And you can count these. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. It's actually counting the spaces as well. Okay? Now here's an interesting idea. Let's set this back to 0. And let's try to put in a negative number. So if I were to change this to -1, what do you suppose I'm going to get? And if you really think about this for a minute, this is just a continuous loop. You can think of it that way. So my expectation is when I put this is that it's going to go back to the very end. It's going to cycle back around and say, this is 0, but -1 is going to be this E. So if I go ahead and I run this, you can see that 0 is still P, and -1 takes me to the back to get E. Okay, so let's try one more thing. What happens if I actually go and I put in 18? What happens now? I've got an error. Do you remember when we did this print the length and I said that it was 18 characters long? We're getting this warning. It is saying string index out of range. Now remember what I said, that this starts at 0. I'm trying to identify the very first character as 0. But there is a total of 18 characters. But if I want to count each individual one, there is no 18th character. It starts at 0 and goes to 17. And 17 is going to be equal to E again. So if I type 17 and then I run this again, what you can see is that I'm getting P for 0, -1 is for E, but if I go forward again in this direction, it brings me to E. Let's clean this up a little bit. And let's suppose I want to extract just the first 3 characters. And the way I could do this is I can actually specify that I want the first 3. I want to start at 0 and go to 3. And I'm going to use a colon and then type in the number 3. So it's important for you to understand what I'm saying is don't get 0, 1, 2. What I'm saying is go ahead and extract the first 3 indexes. So I'm saying 0, 1, and 2. So I'm saying go ahead and get me 3 characters long. So let's go ahead and run this. And you can see here, pyt is my output. So another thing that's kind of interesting that we can do is we can actually just take this out and sort of not specify how far we want to go. And the result is not going to give us an error. It's actually just going to print out the entire string length. So actually, technically by default, I don't even have to put this 0 because by default, that's where it starts. So if I want to do 5, I put the nothing there, the colon, and then 5, and then I run this. You can see that it actually goes and takes the first 5 characters. And lastly, I can actually just do away with everything if I want to, and then run that, and then I'm getting the entire string laid out for me. So the reason I wanted to show you this is because this is how we can get the length of a string. And there are many examples where you might want the length of a string. And then the other thing is I just wanted to show you how do I slice up a string if I want it, if I just want certain pieces of it, but not the entire word. So that's kind of why I showed you that right now. So let's move on to escape sequences. Now, escape sequences are actually a whole bunch of things put together. But for example, what we could say is that there's an escape character, and then there's the escape sequence. Okay, so they're broken down, and I'm going to have to show you this as opposed to try to explain it. Now, let's say in my string, I actually want to put quotations around the word mini. And look at what happens. I've got an imbalance of quotation marks. And what happens if now I want to, just to be funny, say Python mini course, What happens here? So if I go and I try to print that, what's happening is you're seeing I've got this syntax error. Okay, and it doesn't give you a really good clue about what the syntax error actually is. But there is a way that I can go in and address this. And in front of this first bracket, what I can do is I can put what's called my escape character. Okay, and that is the backslash. Okay, I can put this escape character in there. And you see I still have a syntax error problem. Okay. And what happens if I run that? Okay, it actually does print it out, right? But you're seeing one bracket there, or one quotation mark right there. So that's a little bit of a problem. Now, the escape character is really trying to address everything that comes after that character, not before. So together, they're, the escape character with this quotation put together actually makes something called an escape sequence. So when we change the sequence of escape characters, they become, our escape sequence. So how then do I go about putting quotations around the word just mini? Because you can see down here that, it looks incomplete. So the same thing I can do is my escape character with my quotation, and I can put that around the word mini and then run that, and you can see that I now have quotation marks around the word mini. And just for clarification, I can do the same thing with a single quote as well. And so when I run that, you see that it's got a single quote around the word mini. But what do I do now if I actually want to have another backsplash? Not backsplash, backslash. So I can take this out here, and I'm gonna do this. And suppose I want to have this show up. Now, if I run this, you see there's another sort of a backslash there as part of the string. I can do that. But if I put in another one, what happens now? Well, nothing happens now. I've got my escape sequence, and then this is actually adding it as part of the text. Okay, so that one can be a little bit confusing. Now I want to show you something really interesting. Let's say I want to put comments in my code. I want to write something in there. I want to write notes to myself, but I don't want anyone else to see that. What I do is I use the prefix number sign. Okay, and so what you're seeing is I've got the backslash with my quote, my single quote, and I can do this again. I can say number sign with a backslash and a single quote. And as you've seen, we can do this with 2. Okay, some programming languages actually use the comment like this, but in Python, to block out an entire line of code, we don't use that. We actually use the number sign. And one that is extremely important is the actual \n. And this one comes from the C programming language. It's the first time I've ever seen it, but it is used throughout C, C++, and other languages, especially Python here. And what this means is go to the next line. Okay, this is the end of the line. So let me show you what that looks like. If I change this to an N, and then I run this, what you're seeing is that I've got Python mini course. And notice, because there's a space here, that it actually picked up the entire each number of spaces in there. So if I run that again, you can see that it eliminated the space in between. So if I want my text to be printed to the next line, I use the \n. Let's clean this up a little bit. And I'm going to type in first is John. And my second one is going to be Doe. Okay, John Doe. That's my first and my last name. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, suppose I want to get the full name here. And we're going to do something called concatenation. But if I say full is going to be, you can guess it, first plus last. Okay, what do you think is going to happen here? I'm going to go ahead and print this out to the screen, and I'm going to do print and pass the word full as an argument in there. And then when I run this, what do you see? You see John Doe. And the reason is because I actually didn't explicitly specify that I need a space between the two. Now, I can't just start hitting my space bar and do it that way. Okay, what I have to actually do is type in a quotation. And in my quotation is where I can add the space. But since we're doing something called concatenation, now I have to add the plus sign again. So when you see a plus sign on the right-hand side, it could be a mathematical operation, but when it's referred to with strings, it's probably more often than not going to be something called concatenating. And this is where I'm joining different variable strings together to make sort of a full one. So this full, and let me change this to be full name. Okay, and I'll change the variable here. So full name. Now let's go ahead and run that again. And you can see now my John Doe actually has its space between the name. Okay, so this is an example of how to concatenate two different variables together that are strings to make a combined variable output. Now, like I said in the past, all of this stuff on the right-hand side, it performed an operation. And that operation had an ultimate result, which was to concatenate two variables, first and last, together into one. But the result of that was then assigned. Remember the assignment operator? We assigned the result of this to now be represented by the variable full name. Okay, and notice something too. I actually needed to create this whole entire variable first before I can pass that parameter into the print function. I want to show you one more way of doing this. And we can make this change. And to me, to be quite honest with you, I don't think that it saves you all that much code. But what we can do instead of concatenating is we can do this thing. We can prefix it with the letter F, and let's put our quotes in there. And inside here, now I can do my curly braces here, and I can say first. Okay, and then I can go over here, space it out again, and I put my curly braces on both sides of that. And then I can do last. And this actually has the same exact effect as the way I did it with concatenation. This is just a different format, different way of doing it. So if I go ahead and I run it, you can see that it gives me the exact same output. So that's really two different methods of doing it. Okay. Typically what you're going to see is the first method that I showed you. So I think throughout these videos, I'm probably going to stick to the concatenation method of doing this because it's what I'm used to. It's what a lot of programmers are used to. And it's a little bit more intuitive the more experience you get as a programmer seeing it done in this way, especially for the C or C++, even C# programmers, even Java that are coming over and doing it this way. But there is a little bit of a neat thing that you can actually do. And if I redo this and I put it the way it was, remember the length function that we had. You know, just for fun, I can do this. I can put this into this method. I can actually put a method or a function, sorry, inside the curly braces. And then if I run it, you can see that it gives me the output of 4, which is 4 characters of the name John, and then it prints out dough. Okay, so I can do a little bit of magic inside of those curly braces if I choose to. So you can get really creative with the things that you want to do. I can do 10 plus 10, right? And then now I can actually go and run that. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but I'm just showing that you can do this. So now I have 4 for the length, the number of strings for John, and I can do a mathematical operation inside those curly braces and have it output. So 10 plus 10 is in fact 20. Let's now take some time and go look at some string methods. So let's clean this all up again and go back to video equals our Python mini course. And what I want to do right now is talk about, we've been talking about functions, and you've probably heard the term method. They're not exactly interchangeable. They do perform the exact same way when you write a function or you write a method. They do the exact same thing, but just for clarity, what's really important is that you understand the difference between a method and a function. Okay, so when you write them, I want to be clear, when you write them, they are written exactly the same. But sometimes you can go to the library, the Python library, and you think that you're getting a function, which you are, but it's also referred to as a method. Okay, so I can type in video, and if I type the dot, what this does is it starts to call these different methods. They're not functions, although they look identical. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't really matter to me if you say that it's a method or a function. But to be perfectly accurate, we have to say that I'm calling actually a library method on the video variable. Okay, so I have all these different ones that are available to me. So if we looked at an example and I wanted to call this, I could say upper, and you can see that I just typed in that. This is, I've got to put my brackets in there to make that happen. So if I want to see what the result of this is, now I can take the entire thing and wrap the print method around it. So print, okay, and then I need to go and add in another set of brackets. And now let's go ahead and run this. So let's go and have a look and see what the output is. And as you can see, it's taken the entire thing. And of course, with my spelling mistakes, so Python does not have an I in it, it's with an O. So if I run this again, you can see that Python was now changed to all uppercase inside my video string. Now I need to be very, very clear about something here. This is a copy. Okay, this is not manipulating or changing the original video. Okay, this was not changed at all. But this creates a copy and then it manipulates it. Okay, maybe that's a little bit more semantic than anything, but it's important for you to understand that it's actually just a copy that it's manipulating. Okay, it doesn't change the original version of my video string. So like I said, that it's actually creating a copy. And one of the things that I can actually do is, instead of doing it this way, I can, let me take out this line and I'm going to show you something different. I'm going to say video dot upper. Okay, but now what I want to do is, because it's a copy, I can now video underscore capital, and I'll just do cap, and I'm going to assign it to that. So now when I want to print this out, I'm going to say print, and I'm going to say video capital. Okay, and let's print off the other one just for comparison. So print, and I'm going to add in there video. Okay, and let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Now you can see the difference between the two. The first one, I'm actually printing video in capitalization, and I'm printing the regular version of our video. So I have other ones as well. So suppose I want to change this all to lowercase. Okay, what I can do is, after it's been changed to lowercase, I can do something called, I can do video dot title. I'm going to change this to a title case. So when I do this, now I want to wrap that in the printer. I'm going to put that inside here, and you can see for a third time what it should do is capitalize the first, sorry. You see that I got the error, and the reason I got the error is because I didn't actually make this title as a method call. So when I run this now, you can see Python is all capitalized, the capital P, M, and C. Okay, I can do the exact same thing now with lower. I can do the exact same thing. So I can convert it all into lowercase. And you can see it runs that as well. And if I really wanted to get fancy, I could take my cap and change that one. It is now in upper. I can change that to lower. Okay. So there's a lot of things that we can do just by calling these library methods. Okay. And it's the difference between, let's say I wrote a book and my book now sits in the library, or I'm going to go to the actual library and get somebody else's book. Okay. I can do the same thing with methods and functions. I can write my own, or I can go and use somebody else's. Here's another one I want to show you, and it's going to be called the strip function. So let's say the user has all of this sort of white space. There's 4 characters long there. And what I can do is I can say video, not cap. I'll do video dot strip, call that. And then I'm going to wrap it around again, the print function. And I'm going to run that. And what you should see is that it should take away those 4 spaces. So when I run it, you can see these 4 here, or these 3 versions of this, the variable, have the space. But this final one with strip, it doesn't have it. It took out those characters. So I can also do something called left strip. So take all the space from the left side, or I can remove all the space from the right side and strip that away. Okay, it wouldn't make sense on the right side right now, but it certainly would for the left side. Okay. Let's talk about the find method. So I'm going to copy this, print it, go down here, and we're going to talk about find. So let's say I want to find it, but in order to find, I have to tell it what I want to find. So I'm going to do HON, and this is only going to tell me the actual element location. So when I do this, you see that 7 appeared. This returned a number. And what I'm going to do is see if I can change that a little bit too. So if I put this back and I rerun that, you see that my element changed because it got rid of the 4 blank spaces in the beginning. So it was 0, 1, 2, and then H started at my 3rd element. So this really was meant to tell me which element does HON start at. So what happens now though if I change this H to a capital? Because Python is case sensitive. So if I run this, now I'm getting the -1, and that just basically means that that character was not found. So I can do this other one, and we're going to call it a replace. So copy and dump that in there, and we're going to change this to replace. And you've probably used this in Microsoft Word as a find and replace. So I can do the same thing. If I take, let's say HON, I want to replace M, lowercase m, with what? And I need to put in a comma and brackets, and I need to tell it what I want it to be replaced with. So I can put a capital M. So if I go ahead and I run that, you can see that I replaced my lowercase m with a capital M. Let me go ahead and just clean this up a little bit. And we've done replace and we've done find, but let's try something else. Let's do print. And in here, I'm going to look for PYT, okay? And this is going to be the in sort of method that I want to do. And I'm going to say PYT, and that is the first 3 letters of our string. And outside of that, I'm going to say in video. Okay, and what this is going to do is actually return me a true or a false. So let me take out some of this. Just going to clean that all up. And when I run that, you can see that this expression PYT does in fact exist inside of this video string. Okay, and let's try it without. Let's just do PT, see if that works. And you can see now PT doesn't exist as part of this string. So let's change that back to what it was. So Control Z, and I'm going to do the not operator. So I'll copy that and I'll go down to the next line, and I'm going to say PT. I'm going to say, just change that to PT and say not in video. So let's see what happens when I run that. Okay, so what you can see is that the first one here, PYT, is in the string video, but PT is not in the video, and that statement is also very true. What I want to do is again clean that all up, and I think now I want to spend some time looking at numbers. Let me go ahead and clean up my screen. Something that's really quite good about Python is the fact that I can actually do operations, mathematical operations, inside of my print function. So if I do my print and I create my brackets, I can say 1 plus 1, and I can get the output. And this is my plus operation. Okay, so let's say I want to do minus. I can just do the same thing here, and as you can see, I can do this mathematical expression, 1 minus 1. But let's change this to, let's say, 3. Okay, and if I want to multiply, I can do that as well. And I'm going to say, let's see, 2 times 5. and I'll clean this up. And what about division? So if I do division, I can say 3, let's say 4 divided by 2. So I want to do my division symbol and divide by 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and we'll do line by line what it looks like. So as I run this, you can see here I've got the first one, 1 plus 1 is 2, 3 minus 1 is 2, and 2 times 10, or 2 times 5, sorry, is 10. And you can see this issue right here. Okay, and my result is an actual floating point number. Okay, so this is a data type is called a float. Okay, so what if I want to do just an integer and I don't want to have the decimal place? So what I can do is I can copy this, and instead of having 1 slash or 1 division, I can put 2 in there, and I can actually change that output. So now you can see that the first one here is 2.0, that's a float. And the second one, 2, without the decimal or the 0, is an integer value. Okay. I can also do something called modulus. So if I were to change this to 20, and I want to divide it by, let's say, 6, I'm not going to get an even number. I'm going to have a remainder. So what we do is we put this modulus, and that is the percent sign. So let me go ahead and run that. And you see that it's actually not running it very clean right now. So if you actually believed that it wasn't working, you would have actually been wrong. And what this is identifying is not how many times 6 goes into 20. What it is identifying with the modulus is the remainder. So we know that 6 goes into 20 3 times, and that equals 18. But the difference between 18 and 20 is 2. So this is actually the proper output. Now I can do another one, and I can do this. Let's say, for example, I'll take this one, and I'll recopy that and reformat to be an exponent. And the way I'm going to do an exponent is 2 multiplication signs. So if I go to here and I run that, you can see that 4 to the exponent 2 is 16. Okay, so that's kind of your mathematical operators that you typically will use. And believe me, it gets a lot more complicated if you really need it to. Let me clean this up and look at some other mathematical operations. Okay, so let's say I'm going to do, everybody in math likes to use x, so let's do x equals 5. Okay, and that's one way that we would assign the value of 5 over to the name x. And obviously, this is going to be an integer. Now, if I highlight it, you can see that 5 is an integer. But let's say I want to increase the value of x. So I could say x equals 5, and then, or sorry, I can do x plus 5. So I want 5 or x to now be the value of 10. I can do this. This is perfectly legal. In fact, I'm going to show you. So if I say print, because I want you to answer this question, which x is it going to print? And you can see here, I hope that you answered 10. And the reason why it printed the second x, this one here, is because your computer runs from the top down. And the last x that it had seen was actually this one. And notice we're not actually printing out this particular x. What we're actually doing is printing the value that has been assigned to this last x in the order of precedence. Okay, so this is why I showed this example, so that you understand not only the order of operations in terms of math, but order of precedence in terms of how your computer is executing the code that you have written. It goes from the top down. Okay, so let's look at this other thing. I can augment my assignment operator. So I can do something really cool, and it looks like this. I can say x plus equals 5. But just to show the difference, I'm going to say 10. Okay, so what do you suppose is going to happen now? And if you answered that it should print out now 20, you would be right. If you thought it was going to print out 15, you would have been wrong. And I did this on purpose to show you. The first thing that happened is we started x was 5. Then it moved down to the next line and we increased the value of 5 by an additional 5. And so this x here is the new x that we're dealing with. And then on the next line, the value of this one here, this particular x, was actually 10. So the value of x on line 3 was 10. And then we said, take the value of 10 and increase it by another 10. Okay, so this is why you have to understand the order of precedence and what your code is doing from top to bottom. And then also understand what's happening on the right-hand side of your assignment operators and how they are being assigned appropriately to the left-hand side of your variable name. Next, I want to look at some functions that you can use when working with numbers. So I want to go ahead and just clean up my screen a little. So let's look at a couple of useful functions related to numbers. So round. If I learn how to type, that would be great for everybody's benefit, but round, R-O-U-N-D. And this is a function. And let's say I do 5.8. Okay, what this function is obviously going to do is take the number and round it up or round it down. So if I want to print that, what I'm going to do is wrap that in a print function. And let's go ahead and run that and see what happens. And you can see that down here, it rounded it up to the number 6. So let's go down and change it to 3. Okay, and rerun that. And you can see that it now rounded it down based on whether it was above or below 5.5, so 0.5. So it rounded it down. Now what happens if I go to 5 itself? And let's see, it automatically takes 0.5 and rounds it up to 6. So now let's look at the absolute value of a number. So if I copy that and I paste it, and I change this to ABS, which is a short form for not anti-lock brakes. It actually stands for absolute value. And I put in a negative sign there. And let's run this and see what the result is. And you can see the absolute value of that number is 5.5. So really simply, we have a bunch of math methods that you could use. However, it's very, very limited until you do something like this. You go and import something called import, okay, and you just type it math. And what that is saying is, hey, go to the math library and get me a whole bunch of different methods that I can call in the math library. And so what that looks like actually is I can go into Google and I can type in Python 3 math module, and I've got mathematical functions. You can also go to Python math W3 schools if you want. And I'm going to go into this math document here under Python. And I can look at the different math functionality that I can call. Okay, so there's literally hundreds, probably thousands of them that I can call if I really, really want a lot of math functions to call. So there's power and logarithmic functions. There's logs here that you can use. And each one, as you're going through, will give you a written description about what's going on inside. Okay, so I encourage you to go in and start looking at those or save this page in your favorites folder, because you may come back to it and want to understand more of the math functionality that you want to use. So if we were to take the very first one, it's ceil or ceiling. So return the ceiling of x, the smallest integer greater than or equal to x. If x is not a float, delegates this, okay, we should return an integral value. So we should return an integer. So let's give this a try. So back in Visual Studio, if I want to do math, and this is the issue. The reason I did the import is because I actually now have to call this function. So in order to use ceil, C-E-I-L, this is a function, and you can tell by the little icon that looks like a cube, right? So I have to now call this, and I'm going to type in 5.2, and let's see what the result of that is. So I'm going to wrap it in my print function, and let's see what the output is. And these here, what I'm going to do to comment them out is I'm just going to put my hashtag there. And now let's run this. And you can see that the upper ceiling of this is 6. Okay, and this is returning an integer value. Notice that this one is a float, but it's returning the upper ceiling. The limit is an integer value. And I know it's an integer because there's no decimal place there. And so what's really good is you can actually go into this whole list of libraries, read through the descriptions, and get the ones that you want to get. Okay, and there's really good detailed notes on how to use all of these. But again, keep in mind something, that the only way for you to be allowed to use this is if you do the import keyword here. Okay, and think of this almost like having a subscription membership. This is how I'm subscribing to the math library that allows me to go in and use all those functions. And this is something that is going to come back in the future as well, this keyword import. And this is what actually is going to allow us to use some of the other really, really exciting tools in Python like matplotlib and numpy and all that kind of stuff. This is how we get access to other really important libraries out there in the Python universe that we can use in our applications. So make note of this methodology or this keyword import with what it is that you actually want to subscribe to, because I guarantee you, you're going to see it again. Right now, what I want to actually do is now start to talk a little bit about type conversion. Okay, because remember what I said earlier, that we do have data types, and Python for the most part takes care of the data types. But sometimes the default data type is not necessarily what we actually want to stick with. Sometimes we want to actually convert that data type. Let me clean up this screen a little bit. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about type conversion here. And let's say something we haven't talked about before yet is at some point I'm going to want my user to type in some information. Okay, and the way we do this is we use this very special word called input. And thankfully that's very intuitive. And of course it is a method call. And I'm going to want to say, I'm going to be asking them to input something. And inside this method call, I'm giving kind of an instruction. Okay, so that's why I'm putting in the string. And I'm going to say number. Okay, and I'll make it short form. I'll just say num. Okay, so what I want to do now is once I get the number from the user, I want to now assign that value to a different variable. So I can just say x equals. And now when the user types in whatever number that I asked them to, that number is then going to be taken because of the input method or function, and it's going to be assigned now to the value of x. Okay, so there's a whole written description you can see there. Now let's go to y. Y is going to be x is actually going to be x plus 1. Okay, so whatever the value is my user inputs is going to end up being that value plus 1. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Now, if I go ahead and I run this, you see that I've got number right here, right? It wants me to type in a number. So why don't I just go ahead and type in 5 and hit enter. And you notice now that I'm getting this syntax error. I've actually got an error. And the reason is because I've got two different data types being confused here. I've actually got a string and an integer. It was my belief as the user typing it in that I was typing in an integer value. Okay, but if you notice here, I'm now dealing with a string. Okay, so the compiler is actually getting quite confused on what I'm trying to do. So I need to remedy that, because everything that I asked for or everything that I type in typically is being typed in as a string if I use this input value or this input function. And that's very common for other languages as well. So for example, in C#, an input into a text box always gets input into the text box as a string. And this is no different, but somehow we have to convert it so that it is mathematically usable. So try to make that a little bit more clear. What I'm saying is the reason I'm getting the error, it's the equivalent of seeing this. I typed in 5 and I was trying to add 1 to it. So I'm trying to add a string to an integer. And that's very confusing for the computer. So I want to show you something here. If you're ever kind of curious to know what your data type actually is. And this is another method call that we can have. So we can say, I want you to print what my data type is for X. And the way I do that is I do type, because I'm talking about my data type, and it is a method call, and then I type in X. And this is going to tell me what is my data type. And I hope that it's your belief that this is actually going to be what? I don't know. Think about it for a minute. Okay, so think about this for a good minute. I hope that you said string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually type in this number. So down at the bottom, it still prompted me for this. So when I hit enter, you can see right here that it says that my data type is actually a string. Okay, and the reason we're still getting this error is because I have not commented out that line. So let's clean that up and run it one more time. And just to be clear, I'm going to show you 5. And you can see here that it's telling me that the number that I type in, the data type is a string, not an integer. So we need to be very clear about that. So then how do I go ahead and actually solve this problem? And what I want to do right now is I'm going to uncomment this out, and I'm going to highlight it, hit my Alt button, and move it up to 1 line, because I'd like to modify line 5 now. Before I modify line 5, I need to modify line 4. I need to change the type of this. And the way I can do this is I can do something called casting or type casting. And all I do is in front of it, I specify the type of data that I want it to become. And then I put that inside of brackets. So X right now is a string, but I want it to become an integer because this is an integer and I want it to be now converted. So whatever I type up here is going to be assigned to X, and then X is going to be converted into an integer. So let's change what we have inside this bracket. So we're going to do this one here that I showed you earlier, and we're going to say X, and we're going to demonstrate really what each of these really is now. And on the other side, I'm going to do the braces, a comma, and then I'm going to type in Y colon, and this is going to show you again what Y actually is, what data type Y is. So I need to move one of my quotations, and you can see that it doesn't like to have these in that way. So you see something is really good when the color of all your symbols on your screen starts to change. So now let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to clean this up first, run this, and now it asks me to input a data or input a number. So I'm going to type in 5. And now you can see that X is now an integer of 5 and Y, the result of 5 plus 1, is now 6. So that's how that works. So the key takeaway to understand is that every time you type something in using the input function, it is a string. You are typing in a string. And if you want to take that number, you're going to have to modify it into an integer in most cases. The one special one that we need to talk about a little bit is this idea of a Boolean. So bool. Okay, so if I'm trying to cast to a bool, that one's going to be a little bit more challenging, right? Because what this really means is that it's a true or a false situation. So this one you have to pay a little bit of attention to in the future because it can be really tricky. So what you could end up getting is really nothing. Okay, that is false. The other one that it evaluates or equals to false is also 0. And then there's this other one we'll talk about in the future called none. Okay, so all of these, when you put them together, they all end up being false. Okay, so false values. Okay, and obviously converse to that for true is going to have a value in there, and this could be a 1. Okay, or it evaluates to a 1. Okay, so this one is a special case in terms of typecasting or type conversion. So let's look at some more examples. And if I open up my command prompt and I do Python, okay, what I want to do is kind of go through a couple of examples. So if I say bool and in brackets I say 0, my output is going to be false. But let's say now I do bool and inside that I say 1. My output should actually be true. Okay, what about bool -1? Okay, what do you think the answer to that is going to be? It's actually true as well. Okay, and then if I want to say 5, again, it's true. Now, what about a string? Okay, if I put in this empty quotations, okay, that is false. Okay, which is what we said a little bit earlier, that here this will be false. Okay, so that's what we're seeing in the command prompt as well. An empty string is false. What about this? What happens here? False again. Okay, and let's try one more, and I'm just curious to see, what about an empty? Empty is also false. So these are all the conditions that you could end up getting a false output as a result of Boolean. It could be true or false, nothing else. Okay. And the last one I want to show you, what happens if I get this one? What happens if I get a string and I say that the string is false? What do you think is going to happen? Well, I'm hoping you understood that it was true. Okay, there's something inside the string, true or false. Yes, it is. So therefore it's true. In the next video, what we're going to do is spend a lot of time actually talking about control flow. Okay, we're going to do things like understand the logic, and we're going to compare one thing to another. So when we talk about this left-hand side versus the right-hand side of the assignment operator or the equal sign, what does it really mean when it's 2 equal signs versus 1 equal sign, or a plus equal? Or what about greater than or less than? Okay, so we're going to spend some time talking about comparison operators, conditional statements, something called the ternary operator, and logical operators. So we've got a lot to do to deal with the flow of programs. And the way I want you to think about it is, at some point, software makes a decision. You know, think about yourself. I'm at an intersection or a T intersection out on a country road. Do I go left or do I go right? And if I go left, what happens? If I go right, what happens? So we've got to start to understand in software what our control flow is actually going to be and how do we do that in Python. So that's up next in the next video.